Hello, and welcome to today's video. Now that we are approaching the final third of the NBA season, I thought it would be a good idea to give you guys updated top 25 fantasy basketball players. Let's get into it. Coming into number one has got to be Nikola Jokic. He is averaging nearly 60 fantasy points per game and has not had to deal with many injuries so far this year. He is averaging 26.1 points per game, 12 rebounds per game, and 8.9 assists per game. Time and time again, he proves how he really is unmatchable in fantasy basketball. If you drafted him, you should be looking forward to seeing him continue success in the next part of the season. Coming in at number two, I have Luka Doncic, averaging 63.8 fantasy points per game. Luka truly is incredible. This season, he is making a good candidate for MVP, and the stats don't lie. He is averaging 34.2 points per game, 8.8 rebounds per game, and 9.5 assists per game. Truly remarkable, carrying the Mavericks team on his back since Kyrie has been out a ton this season. Coming in at number three, I have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Shai is averaging 59.6 fantasy points per game and is the main guy on the Thunder, who are running for the title this year. He is averaging 31.1 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, and 6.5 assists per game. Shai has proven to be unstoppable and is only going to get better in the second half. Coming in at number four, I have Giannis Antetokounmpo, averaging 58.6 points per game. Giannis is only going to heat up in the final third of the season, averaging 30.8 points per game, 11.2 rebound per game, and 6.4 assists per game. The only thing that concerns me is injury problems. Giannis Antetokounmpo has had to deal with devastating injuries like the lower back contusion in the playoffs. It does help that the Bucks don't play defense, though. So as long as he doesn't get hurt, there shouldn't be anything to worry about. Coming in at number five, I have Anthony Davis, averaging 55.8 fantasy points per game this season. He and LeBron have clearly found connection. He has had to deal with injury, but it doesn't matter when you're putting up the numbers Davis is. He's averaging 24.9 points per game, 12.2 rebounds per game, 3.8 assists per game, and 2.5 blocks per game. Coming in at number six, I have Donovan Mitchell from the Cavaliers, averaging 51.9 points per game. Mitchell has been dominant, as always in the NBA, although he did miss a big chunk of the season. Fantasy managers could say that it was worth the wait, as he is averaging 28.4 points per game, 5.4 rebounds per game, and 6.3 assists per game. Mitchell has been consistent throughout the season. I expect him to continue to be. Coming in at number seven, I have Kevin Durant, averaging 51.5 fantasy points per game, 28.2 points per game, 6.6 rebounds per game, and 5.7 assists per game. Durant's age doesn't seem to matter. The Suns have been entertaining to watch when fully healthy this season, and I think with Durant they could make a run in the playoffs this season. Coming in at number eight, I have Jason Tatum, averaging 47.6 points per game. Tatum hasn't had the best of seasons, but his standard is really high. Jason is averaging 27.1 points per game, 8.6 rebounds per game, and 4.6 assists per game. He and the Celtics are the team to beat heading into the playoffs, and the sky is the limit with Tatum. I expect him to have a great end of season after the All-Star break. So if you can trade for him, I recommend doing so. Coming in at number 9, I have Domantas Sabonis of the Sacramento Kings. Sabonis is averaging 51.1 fantasy points per game, and his stats do not lie. Averaging 20.1 points per game, 13.2 rebounds per game, and 8.3 assists per game. The guy is averaging nearly a triple-double every game. Fantasy managers should not be worried with him, and it will be exciting to see how much more he can produce for the Kings the rest of the season. Coming in at number 10, I have Tyrese Halliburton of the Indiana Pacers, who at the time that I am recording this video just won the NBA, a team skill challenge event in Indiana. Halliburton is averaging 53.6 fantasy points per game, 21.8 points per game, 3.9 rebounds per game, and an astonishing 11.3 assists per game, leading the league. The only thing that is stopping him from being higher on this list is injury problems. If you're a Pacer fan, you should be happy you have him on your team. Coming in at number 11, I have Devin Booker of the Phoenix Suns. Booker is the second Suns player so far on this list, and there is a reason why. Averaging 47.6 fantasy points per game, 4.6 rebounds per game, and 7.6 assists per game, Booker has proved yet again he can be trusted in fantasy. He has dealt with injuries again this season, like calf, hip, and ankle problems. Fantasy managers know that he is a solid player unless injured. Booker is at his best in clutch moments. Brings us to the next player on this list. Stephen Curry is averaging 44.3 fantasy points per game, 28 points per game, 4.4 rebounds per game, and 5.0 assists per game, but he has been tearing it up lately. Curry only seems to get better as the season goes along, and I think he is in store for a great finish to the season. Coming in at number 13, I have Anthony Edwards of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Edwards is averaging 42.7 fantasy points per game, 26.3 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, and 5.3 assists per game. He, as well as the Timberwolves, should stay consistent for the rest of the year. Coming in at number 14, I have Trae Young of the Atlanta Hawks. Young is averaging 48.5 fantasy points per game, 2.7 rebounds per game, and 10.9 assists per game. The reason why he isn't higher on this list is because the Hawks aren't going to make the playoffs this year, so that could mean less production from Trae Young. He is the main guy in Atlanta though, so I still accept him to produce in fantasy. Coming in at number 15, I have LeBron James of the Los Angeles Lakers. Time and time again, LeBron seems to be ageless in the NBA, averaging 49.8 fantasy points per game, 7.2 rebounds per game, and 7.8 assists per game. James never drops his standard when playing in the NBA. The Lakers are fighting for a playoff spot this year. So I think the Lakers and LeBron will only raise their game for the final parts of the season. James is only making more of a case to be the GOAT as the season goes on, and I think he should pass the great Michael Jordan and become the GOAT of basketball when he retires, which could be never at this rate. Coming in at number 16, I have Victor Wembanyama of the San Antonio Spurs. Wembanyama seems to be the only bright side of the Spurs team this season, averaging 20.5 points per game, 10 rebounds per game, and 3.2 assists per game. Wembanyama is having an amazing rookie year so far and is making an incredible case for the Rookie of the Year award. He is also averaging an incredible 3.2 blocks per game with that 8-foot wingspan. Getting Victor on your team was a steal. Coming in at number 17, I have Jalen Brunson of the New York Knicks. Brunson is averaging 45 fantasy points per game, 27.6 points per game, 3.8 rebounds per game, and 6.5 assists per game. With Randall missing some time, Jalen is only going to get better as the season goes on. Jalen Brunson is a valuable player with a consistent and impactful performance, earning him a solid ranking for the rest of the season in fantasy basketball. Coming in at number 18, I have De'Aaron Fox of the Sacramento Kings. Fox is averaging 45.4 fantasy points per game, 26.8 points per game, 4.1 rebounds per game, and 5.5 assists per game, as well as 1.9 steals per game. His impact is evident in various videos, showcasing his skills and best scoring performances, and he and Sabonis are clearly top 20 players by themselves in the NBA this season, but with them being on the same team, they only get better. Coming in number 19, I have Tyrese Maxey. Maxey is averaging 44.9 fantasy points per game, 25.7 points per game, 3.7 rebound per game, and 6.4 assists per game. He's a rising and impactful player, with his skills and contributions being acknowledged by various assessments and analysts. With Embiid out for a big part of the remainder of the season, Maxey's fantasy production is only going to get better. Coming in at number 20, I have Damian Lillard of the Milwaukee Bucks. After being traded and no longer being the number one guy on his team, Lillard has exceeded his expectations as the number 2 in Milwaukee. averaging 41.7 fantasy points per game, 24.6 points per game, 4.1 rebounds per game, and 6.7 assists per game. There is no surprise that Lillard is another All-Star this year. What's surprising is that he is getting his first ever start in an All-Star game. That just proves how good he has been this season. Coming in at number 21, I have Scottie Barnes of the Toronto Raptors. Barnes is averaging 45.4 fantasy points per game, 20.1 points per game, 8.1 rebounds per game, and 6 assists per game. He's also averaging 2.7 steals, blocks per game. Known for his versatility and defensive skills, Barnes has become a significant player for the Raptors, marking the beginning of a new era in Toronto. Coming in at number 22, I have Kawhi Leonard of the Los Angeles Clippers. Kawhi is averaging 47.4 fantasy points per game, 24.1 points per game, 6.2 rebounds per game, and 3.7 assists per game. Kawhi has dealt with injuries so far this season, which is why he is not higher on this list. Kawhi is recognized for his stellar performance as a two-way wing player for the Los Angeles Clippers. Kawhi will go down as one of the greats, and I expect him to do well for the rest of his career in this season. Coming in at number 23, I have another Los Angeles Clipper, James Harden. Harden is averaging 43.7 fantasy points per game, 17.5 points per game, 5.1 rebounds per game, and 8.4 assists per game. Harden, Kawhi, and George have proved how good them and the Clippers are this season, with a good chance of making a run in the playoffs. Harden seems to be the distributor between the three and is racking up a ton of assists this year, which leads to him averaging less points than other years, which is why he is not higher on this list. Coming in at number 24, I have Kyrie Irving of the Dallas Mavericks. Irving is averaging 47.6 fantasy points per game, 25.5 points per game, 5.2 rebounds per game, and 5.5 assists per game. Kyrie has proven to be a great number 2 in Dallas, and he and Doncic have found a great connection this season, which has led to the Mavericks having great success this season. Although Kyrie has gotten hurt this season, it does not concern me as Dallas are fighting for a playoff spot, so he's going to play through injury, which means more fantasy points for him. Coming in at number 25 and the last play on this list, I have Lauri Markkanen of Utah Jazz. Lauri is averaging 40.8 fantasy points per game, 23.4 points per game, 8.6 rebounds per game, and 1.9 assists per game. Lauri and the Jazz have had a surprisingly successful season so far, with Markkanen leading the way. Now let's get into some honorable mentions for this ranking. First up, we have Paul George of the Los Angeles Clippers, who is averaging 40.6 fantasy points per game. Next up, we have Karl Anthony Towns, who's averaging 38.5 fantasy points per game. Finally, we have Alperen Sengun, who is averaging 42.9 fantasy points per game. Well, that's going to bring a wrap to this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below your opinions on these rankings and who should have been on this list or higher or lower. Thanks so much for watching. Peace.